Hi everyone, welcome to Saptarishis Astrology channel, and today we have once again Michael Reed with us. Michael, please welcome exclusively on our channel.
Oh, thank you so much, Sunil. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed so much the last time we all had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Pai and with Kapil. It was such a good time. I could have kept going on forever.
Yeah, I received a remark that why only men were present in that session. Why not women astrologers? So I decided that let's have our dear friend Inge from Germany. Hi Inge, how are you doing?
Let me unmute Inge. There we go.
Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm very fine. Thank you very much for this invitation. It is a great opportunity to listen to both of you. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here.
Yeah.
Thank
you. We have Rani from Mauritius. Hi Rani, how are you doing?
Hello everyone, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks a lot Sunilji for inviting me for this, and thanks Michael Reed for imparting your knowledge to us.
And thank you for being here. Yes.
Michael, first and foremost, I must apologize for having delayed this session. We've been planning this for 4 months, and my health and all that I've delayed. My sincere apologies on that.
Oh, no problem. I completely understood. I would rather, somebody take care of all those things first, and, then deal with the other stuff later. Take care of your health first.
Yeah. And Michael, let me ask the first question everybody asks is, how did you start in astrology?
How did I start in astrology? It was an interesting story, and I was listening to one of Kapil's videos. I don't know which one, but he was talking a week or so ago about the concept that you don't pick astrology picked you. And it just kind of randomly happens like that. Back in the 90s, I used to live with another now well-known astrologer. I won't speak his name, just for privacy's sake, but I used to live with him and used to look at a lot of the charts, and just kind of began to hit me by osmosis, picking up on it. And I was a Kundalini yoga teacher a few years later, and so I was always into Vedic philosophy, and I went to see a spiritual teacher and had a reading by a Vedic astrologer called Prasanan. And for me, I sat down in the chair, and he asked me 3 questions about my father. And us Westerners, we don't have this experience with astrology like you do in the East, So he asked me 3 questions about my father, and then goes, "You were born a minute and 10 seconds earlier." And so my jaw just dropped open. I was like, "Oh, how does he know that?" Now I know how he knows it. He was, just rectifying on the fly and trying to make things match up. But it just amazed me. And I immediately started delving into everything I could find about Vedic astrology in general, reconnected with my previous roommate that I had lived with. And after I'd been, working with Vedic astrology for a while, and he just kind of turned to me and he says, "I've got a waiting list about a year long. Do you want to just jump in?" And the rest is history. And I took a sabbatical for several years, and then kind of got back into it within the last couple of years, and here I am.
So how many years it's been so far, the journey?
With Vedic astrology in general, since about, I think, 2003, 2004. With astrology in general since 1996. In many different various forms, working with astrology. Yeah.
And your focus has...
And then I'm sorry, go ahead, Sunil. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask, your focus, has it been only nakshatras, or what's your love? What's your love?
Well, I absolutely love the nakshatras because I feel like the nakshatras picked me. And the way I got into the nakshatras was, well, first of all, I just got fascinated by them when I was learning them and seeing how they were bringing things out in the chart to me. Like I would just look at a chart, take what little I knew about that nakshatra, and all of a sudden a thought would pop in my head. And if I was connected to a client, the way I would handle that is I would just ask them a question based upon what I was seeing. And then I'd listen to the feedback that I was getting. More so than any book that I ever read, that is how I learned the most about nakshatras, is listening to clients, getting feedback.
And honestly speaking, I'd like to make a confession here. And listening is the toughest art in astrology.
It is. But it's such a vital art. It's such a good skill. Because, say for instance, you've got a client that's talking to you, and they're kind of coming out with something that's bothering them, and they're saying, I want to do this in my life, but I really feel like I don't have the time. What's the first thing you're going to look for?
Saturn.
What is Saturn doing in this person's chart? And that just takes you right into the thing that you can just kind of help them right there on the spot. Especially with the nakshatra. If you know what nakshatra, whatever the trigger planet is, if you go into that, you're going to have such a phenomenal amount of background for the individual. Because the nakshatras, I find, really give the subjective experience that the individual is going through, what their consciousness is experiencing, because it's based on the moon. Obviously, planets are in nakshatras, but nakshatras are intimately connected to the moon. They're the moon's wife, right? They're there to grow the consciousness of the specific planet. So they're very deeply connected to the moon.
Okay. And do you, teach also nakshatras? Do you have a course or something?
I have a video course that I did with another astrologer, Ryan Korzak, and that's available on my site. Probably a little bit later in the year, I'm going to do a live course. When time allows, do another live course. At present, I'm doing another course starting this Sunday, and then there's a separate module from that starts in the spring, and I don't want to build myself up with too many courses to the extent that, that I don't have time.
Which course you're starting this Sunday? Which course?
This course is on the Avastas, the Baladi Avastas, the Jagradati Avastas, the Lajatati Avastas, even Deeptati Avastas, and how to use Vimshatari Dasha period, along with something called mutual agenda, meaning that a planet can, both be the ruler of a planet that rules a specific house cusp. It can rule a house cusp. It can rule a Rashi. And when I'm saying Rashi and house cusp, I tend to work with dynamic house cusps. In other words, specific points in each chart. And when I'm saying Rashi, I'm talking about the equal house system. So you can kind of see everything that a planet is associated with, right?
Okay.
And if you know what period the person's running, then you can really get a good idea working with the Avastas of what their experience of that is going to be like. It's a wonderful predictive skill. And I started the specific course by working with Jaimini techniques. So the ultimate goal is using Jaimini, seeing what Jaimini is saying for a specific period through the Rashi Dashas, and then confirming through Vimshatari Dasha periods. And then in the third module of the course, we're going to learn a system of transits so that you can take all three of those together and combine them and really get an excellent pinpointed prediction for an individual, especially if you have a rectified birth time.
Okay. Today we're going to speak on nakshatras. But before we go there, which particular book or books really stands out for you on nakshatras?
Bepin Bahari.
Oh, so tough. So tough a book.
Yes, such an excellent book. And I hear a lot of people who read that book and they go, well, you know what? I felt it was kind of foggy. But you know what I appreciate about Bahari's approach is you may read that the first time and it's foggy, but you read it a second time, you're going to get another layer. You read it a third time, there's a deeper layer that comes to you. And that's the way his writing style was. It was very esoteric so that it revealed itself to you over time. I must have read that book, every single nakshatra description, hundreds of times in there. And every time I get a new meaning out of it.
Oh my God. That book is not available anymore. And I used to have that book. And, what I do, having a bookshop, what I do is I'm actually now diverting, but any book that I know is going out of print, I tell my office boy, take this and keep it in a separate shelf.
Yes.
Because you never know, that book will never ever come back.
I know.
Yeah. So that's what I do. Unfortunately, he sold it back again to somebody. It was not removed from the website. But that's a book. Bipin Bihari, what I remember is he used to be called the king of Nakshatras. In US, he was called the king of Nakshatras. I think he had a great background also in esoteric spirituality. He has written so many books which are not available.
The Theosophical Society. He was connected with the Theosophical Society. Yeah.
Something great. All right, let's come to our teaching part. And we are all excited. And you have 3 students today, all willing to learn. What are you going to teach us today?
I want to talk about Tarabala. Right?
Tarabala.
I'll explain what that is here in a moment. But Tara is most often, for those people who don't know, Tarabala is most often used for muhurta, picking a muhurta. Occasionally used in understanding transits. But I find that a lot of people are not really using it on an interpretive level. And there's a lot of very profound information that you can get using Tarabala, because it's going to show how that specific individual is connecting with, and this is a very complex thing to say, so let me say it and then I'll explain it afterwards, how that individual is connecting with growing the consciousness of the particular planet that one might be talking about. And I'll show some examples here in a moment. But as astrologers, I think one of the most important things for us to do is to understand where our client is at. And quite often you can have somebody who will, sit in the chair opposite you, or if you're connected over the internet, connect over the internet opposite you, and they'll be talking to you about one thing. But really what's going on is something that's completely different. And really they want to talk to you about that. They want to talk to you about that. But they don't want to talk to you about that. And Tarabala can really help you to get to that. It can really help you to understand it. So let me take us into our slides. I have to change screens here. And I have to admit, I'm not the most proficient with PowerPoint.
Oh, same here, actually.
So if it crashes a couple of times, be patient with me. Here we go. Let me see if I can make this larger without having it move on. Let's see what happens. Okay, now here's the next question I have. Does anybody know how you move to the next slide?
The arrow, up and down arrow that you have?
Right, so I'll move to, there we go. Right, let's start here. Let me bring up the this pointer tool. There we go. So basically what you do with Tarabala is you want to see the distance from one particular nakshatra to another based upon the lord of that individual nakshatra. Let's just create an example in our head. Let's say we've got somebody who has their moon is in, let's say their moon is in Bharani nakshatra, okay? And let's say Venus happens to be in Punarvasu nakshatra. So what we would do is we would count the distance from Bharani
Hello.
to Punarvasu, which is 1, 2. Can everybody see me okay? Because I just got an internet message here. Okay, good. And sadhaka, with sadhaka, generally what tends to happen is after the individual comes up against some frustration or resistance in regards to something, they recognize that they need to really take a look at what's going on and make some adjustments and try to find harmony with the situation. really taking a look at the situation, try to perfect whatever they're having hardship with.
I
Yep.
need to, because I think in between the net got a bit, internet got a bit this thing. Moon, so
Mhm.
I would request you to repeat. Moon is in Bharani
Moon is in Bharani.
and
Yes.
Venus is in Punarvasu.
And Venus is in Punarvasu.
So how do we do the counting?
So here we have Bharani, correct? Yes. So that's number one. You always count number one with the Janma. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to take us into a chart here in a moment that has it all lined up for us, just kind of neatly delineated and everything when I give an example.
So in the definition, you see 6, which is sadhaka.
Sadhaka, effective, productive, efficient, finishing, perfecting, fulfilling, useful, all those things. And what I have written over here is consideration lead to heightened awareness, leading to proper decisions that bring fulfillment and harmony of inner and outer resources. In relation to, if we're looking at the moon and we're looking at the Jaimini Nakshatra, that's going to be that individual's particular life path. They're going to stop and really consider everything, really try to make the appropriate decisions, really try to finish up their karma, really try to be productive with their karma, try to perfect themselves. That quite simply will be the course of their whole life. That pops up for them over and over and over again. That's their life path, the course that it tends to take. I have a really wonderful example that I will take us into. If I can make my PowerPoint cooperate. And if I can't, we'll do this. Maybe if I close that down, it'll work. For some reason, my PowerPoint is getting stuck.
Okay. Yeah, even that might work.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. That's it. Okay. Here we have the chart of Jim Morrison, who was the lead singer from a band in the 60s called The Doors.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, let's talk about a few things while we're on this journey. Jim Morrison's natal moon was in Bharani Nakshatra, which Bharani is associated with Yama, the god of death. Morrison was so fascinated about death. Almost all of his poetry and all of his lyrics had some connotation of death or transformation associated with it. This is how powerfully the nakshatras speak about an individual. There's a particular Doors song which really is going to very aptly describe the connection between the moon, the Jaimini Nakshatra, and the ruler of that Jaimini Nakshatra, which is break on through to the other side, okay? Which is about, breaking the boundaries of consciousness. And if you see, the moon is ruled by Bharani, which is ruled by Venus, and we've got Venus in Swati Nakshatra. And what is Swati represented by? Coral, which is a marine animal that secretes its own skeleton. So breaking beyond the boundaries, wanting to expand constantly. That was just his outlook. But it's interesting because if we go, waiting for my software to catch up. There we go. This is his Tara. So here we can see the moon as the Jaimini Nakshatra. And if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll find Venus. Okay. Let's go back a couple of slides and see if we can discover a lot of what that's about. 5 is Prachak, facing, coming, averted, moving in an opposite direction. Westward, inner, past, gone. But the general idea is the individual only finds fulfillment in their life to a certain degree. So there's a need to search for a greater level of fulfillment. And if you read a lot about this man's life, he was always wanting to push things further and always wanting to take things higher and break the boundaries, and could just never feel satisfied with it. So this is a really wonderful technique for just generally understanding what's going on for the individual who you're giving a consultation to. For instance, like one of the things I like to do is if I'm talking to somebody and they go, I feel like I'm never quite getting there, then I would be guessing that they've got the ruler of their Janma Nakshatra is either in Vipat, Tara, or Prachak, which we were just talking about. Those two positions, it's constant frustration over and over again.
Okay.
Now, a lot more comes into the equation other than this. We can look at the dignity of the Nakshatra Lord. Can look at so many different factors in order to understand it, because we could see, I think, let's use Morrison's case as an example.
Okay.
Let's move forward a bit. Actually, let's go back one. There we go. Let's look at this one. So we can see this chart here gives us an idea of how strong that Venus is. If we look for this black number that's down here, that's a fairly strong Venus in this particular instance. I know I haven't explained this. I was hoping to have a chance to go into all of this today, but I don't think that we'll have a chance to go into all of it. So we'll just kind of give a brief précis. Even though the individual's life is going to be plagued, or Jim Morrison's life would be plagued with never being able to find happiness or never being able to find that satisfaction with his art, because we're also looking at Venus expression, more it's very expressive, arts-oriented planet, amongst other things. Since he's never finding that level of happiness, it's still something, even though that's a difficult experience for him, it's still something that made him a very powerful person. It still fit in with his particular life path. He was able to be more artistic because he had that particular experience of having that hardship and consistently coming up against that frustration and those difficult feelings. So are you following this? Yeah?
I have a question, but
go ahead.
Before that, Inge and Rani, do you have any questions on this?
Let me unmute everybody. Okay.
So at present, I don't have question. In fact, I find it a very interesting concept. And yes, I can follow you, Michael. It is great.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thanks, Michael. I don't have any questions too. And in fact, it's very interesting.
Okay. Okay. It's just a really simple. I'm sorry. Do you have a question, Sunil?
I have a lot of questions,
Okay.
What I want to understand is, you are taking moon and you're counting the bala for Venus, the distance between moon and Venus. Am I right? You're counting that way.
Correct.
And
correct.
We do the same for all the planets in relation to the moon.
I handle it a couple of different ways, and that's a good question, and that's something I want to go into, right? So let me go back to our chart that lets us take a look at that. And let's go back one. Let's say, for instance, we were looking at the position of his Venus. Okay, we've got Venus in Swati here. Okay, so we would both want to look at the position of Venus from the Janma Nakshatra, right? But another thing we can do is we can look at the position between Venus and Rahu, which rules Swati. In that instance, the way that the individual would be encountering, the experience of that Venus would be twofold, right? It would be both Prachak, and it would also be 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be called Kshema. And I'm going to explain that. Let me just go forward one. Let me just rehash what we did. Okay, so Venus is in, I'm sorry, I actually did that wrong. Let's go back.
Venus is
Got
in
ahead of myself.
Swati.
Since Venus is in Swati, I'm getting the wrong screen. Here we go. We'll find it eventually. So Venus is in Rahu's Nakshatra. Okay. From the position of the moon, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's actually, we're talking about Prachak here. Prachak means a fulfillment only to a certain degree, so there's a need to search for a greater level of fulfillment. Okay, so that's what we're seeing with that particular instance. But we would then want to see the distance from where Venus is to where Rahu is, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is Kshema. So we're starting from Venus being in Rahu's Nakshatra, and we're going to Ashlesha, which is where Rahu is. So 1, 2, 3, 4. With Kshema, the individual recognizes that there's practicality or potential associated with it. Kshema, the simple meanings being habitable, security, or there can be prosperity associated with it. So the individual's life path, as we're talking about Jim Morrison, is one of only finding fulfillment to a certain degree. But as we were talking about before, he took that particular thorn in his side and he used it to his advantage. You see? And you can go all around the chart with every single nakshatra, every single planet, every single nakshatra that the individual has going on. You can even, in addition to that, you can look at a particular dasha period that the individual is in. Let's say let's say, even though he's not alive now, let's say he's in Saturn Ketu. We've got Saturn in Mrigashira, which is ruled by Mars. And we've got Ketu, which is in Shravana, ruled by the moon. So with that particular instance, we're starting with Mrigashira, and we're counting to the moon. So we're starting with Mars, and we're counting with moon to moon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 is Parama Maitra, extreme, highest, or best friend. Unity bringing greatest fulfillment. So in Saturn Ketu, he would be following a path of really using Saturn Ketu to its ultimate. Really trying to complete the work, do the work. And that's just taking a quick, simple look. We'd also have to look at some of the more complex things, such as the dignity of Saturn and the dignity of Ketu, not only in the Rashi chart, but in each particular Varga chart. So we can understand how that's playing out in every single aspect of the individual's life. I tell you what, why don't we do that? Why don't we play with that briefly, right? Yes. So we're looking at that, at the unity, bringing greatest fulfillment. How am I going to use this to my advantage? Let's say we're talking about career, and we're looking at the Shamsha chart. Bring up my pointer. And we're talking about Saturn and Ketu. If you're working with house cusps in the Dashamsha, what you've got is you've got the first and the third being ruled by Saturn. Okay, let's go back a chart or two, because I don't have the Rashi chart up. I want to see what house cusps K2 is conjunct. The first house. So basically we're dealing with the first, the third house. So on one level, he'd be looking, it would be something in connection with his business associates, career associates. Third house can rule, siblings associated with our career, okay? Or some sort of gain through sibling at that particular time. But how is that working for him, right? Unity bringing the highest fulfillment. He's going to try to put a lot of energy into himself through his associates. Well, Saturn is not very strong in the Dashamsha chart. Okay, K2 is in Taurus, which is under Venus's rulership. So we'd need to take a look at Venus. So basically, even though he's going to put a lot of energy into that, it's not going to bear much fruit.
So Venus is showing in the Avastha.
Venus is showing, I'm sorry?
In the Dashamsha Avastha, Venus
is Mrita, which means it's dead. Right. Saturn is, because Saturn is Sushupti.
What does Sushupti mean?
Because he's in, Sushupti is when a planet is in an enemy sign. Here, I think I actually have a slide here. Let's move forward on all these. And we can take a look. A graha in debilitation or natural enemies Rashi. That makes it Sushupti. And so when a planet's Sushupti, it doesn't have any strength. And in that particular instance, if you see all these numbers up here that are in the red, that means because of Saturn being in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, let's say, for instance, he happened to be in Saturn moon, then his connection, are we looking at, sorry, I don't even know if I'm on Jim Morrison's chart. Bear with me a moment.
I think, because I earlier saw Saturn, Mars in...
There we go. This is where we want to go. But still, the moon would be giving a lot of pain to Saturn.
So the one in Kala software, if it shows red, it's like minus.
It's, well, here's the trick, and I'm actually working on doing a course on this weekend, because it's a rather complex concept, but once you get it, it's really phenomenal. It's such a phenomenal technique to use in conjunction with the nakshatras, as I'll talk about here in a moment. But let's say, for instance, Venus is in Swati. In that particular time, if we're looking at Venus, because Venus is ruling K2, but let's say he was in Saturn Venus, or let's say he happened to be in Venus Moon, as he was in 1969, right before he died, right? Venus is not happy due to its association with the moon in this chart, and it's because it's receiving an aspect. I remember looking at this. It's receiving an aspect from the moon in the Rashi chart. So you carry that over to the divisional chart. And so Venus is not in very good state because it's Rita. And then it receives that aspect from the moon and it takes it into a negative balance. So in answering your question, a planet can have red numbers and be receiving damage from another planet, but it may not go into a negative balance.
Okay.
The individual would still have some hardship from that. But it's when a planet goes into a negative balance, it cannot manage the houses that it rules. It can't manage its responsibilities in the sign.
Okay.
Yeah, it can't handle it. So that's what happens in that particular instance. But let's say, for instance, we're looking at the moon, and we're looking at Moon Venus. Well, that was a very difficult time for Morrison's career. It was something that happened in that particular point because he was always wanting to kind of push the boundaries and take things further. He kind of looked at himself as being a shaman of a certain sort. And it's interesting too, because if you look at the planet that rules his third Rashi and the 12th, it's in Magha Nakshatra. That's Jupiter. So he thought of himself as a shaman. So he was always wanting to take the crowd a step higher and a step beyond that, right?
Can you expand on that, Magha Nakshatra? You said, why shaman?
I will explain. Yeah, most definitely. I have found over and over again with a lot of my clients, I've encountered a lot of people who are into shamanic healing, or they like to astral travel, or even, work with tarot, or work with things along those lines. I have found a lot of those people with placements in Magha Nakshatra. Why?
Really?
Because Magha gives the capacity to leave the body, to journey.
Yeah.
It lets them journey. And interestingly enough, too, I was talking about this with Kapil the other night. Magha is the entry point into the tamasic-based nakshatras. So it marks the point on the journey of the soul where it's recognizing that it's encased in a body. It's got 1 foot that side, 1 foot this side. It can go from that end of the spectrum to this end of the spectrum. It can journey up into the realm of spirit, or it can bring that down to the concrete.
Okay. I would like to just ask more questions on this. On how would you take the avastha of Jupiter and interpret it along with the nakshatra?
Expand upon your question a little bit more, if you don't mind, please, just so I understand. Yeah.
We discussed about Jupiter being in Magha Nakshatra, being the third lord and the 12th lord. Okay.
Right.
Jupiter is in an avastha, a particular avastha. So how do we combine the nakshatra traits and the avastha traits?
Right. I don't have. Let's look at what degree Jupiter's in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Jupiter's in a Kumara avastha. Okay, so this is actually going to be a relatively strong Jupiter. Actually, we can look down here, right? That's an excellent Jupiter. In order to understand the nakshatra interpretation of that, we also need to look at Ketu. Not the nakshatra of Ketu necessarily, but the Rashi Ketu's in. Ketu's in Saturn's Rashi, because the nodes have no body of their own. Okay, so they rely on their lord in order to determine dignity, unless we're using the placement of Scorpio and Taurus.
Why did you say Ketu? If you said if you want to understand nakshatras, we have to look at Ketu.
The reason for Ketu is because we're talking about Magha Nakshatra, right? So let me explain. If you have a planet in a particular nakshatra, as in Jupiter is in Magha, Jupiter has its own strength. Okay, but it's hard to look at the avastha of Ketu. To look at the avastha of Ketu, you have to look at Saturn, which rules Capricorn. You've got an okay Saturn there, right? So both of those planets are productive. But let's say, for instance, Ketu wasn't offering any productivity. You've got a strong Jupiter nonetheless. So Jupiter can carry that energy through and still be effective, even though there's difficult dignity associated with it. So let's say, for instance, we're not talking about Saturn having, and this actually fits in his particular case, because if we look at it in the Dashamsha, we get something different, okay? But let's say we're talking about the Rashi chart. And let's say, for instance, Saturn was Sushupti, or basically asleep in the Rashi chart. Then basically Ketu isn't going to have good dignity to help with Magha Nakshatra. So some of the bad associations or difficult associations of Magha Nakshatra are pridefulness. Or as Magha is also associated with the Pitris or the ancestors, not stopping to listen for guidance, not paying attention, thinking that the ego knows everything in association with it. Okay? Jupiter, because Jupiter is strong, Jupiter would still be able to be productive, even though it might give a certain degree of arrogance in association with one's associates, which could bring a lot of loss into his life, because we're talking about the 3rd and the 12th, right? So this is how you can begin to put all these things together. And just kind of jumping ahead, because I don't know how much time we have. Can anybody do a time check for me, Sunil?
I think another 15 minutes we got.
Excellent, excellent. The point that I was on with this, I forgot my point. Be the first to admit.
Jupiter.
What was I just saying?
Jupiter.
Right. So we were saying Jupiter could still be effective in that particular nakshatra. It would but there would probably be a lot of pridefulness and the potential to not really listen or stop and look for guidance. But Jupiter would still be able to carry that through. But let's say, for instance, with K2 and poor dignity, even though he's able to carry it through, it's going to create some problems or some difficulties. And we could even go another step further and look at the Tara that's there. How does that play itself out? What's the different distance between Jupiter and K2? Okay, so basically, let's look at where first Jupiter is from the Janma Nakshatra. That's in the 9th position. If you remember before, we were saying that's Parama Maitra. So wanting to put a lot of energy into it, unity with that particular concept, unity with his Jupiter, unity with feeling like he was somebody who could journey to other realms and help to guide people further, right? Then if you look at the distance between Jupiter and K2, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's Kshema again. Practicality and stability offered through doing that. So he recognized in connection with his associates, and if you read any of the Doors biographies, you'll see that all the other members of the Doors, which were his associates, felt that he was a teacher to them. And he recognized that with his associates, he was there as kind of the shaman or the teacher to kind of take them to the next level.
Okay.
But you can, what I was going to lead up to in association with that is if we remember where Jupiter is, and if we remember where Ketu is in terms of being Parama Maitra and being in the 9th Tara and the 4th Tara and also Kshema, as we were saying, and then we go and look at the Shamsha chart, then we could see that Ketu in this particular instance is in Taurus. So we need to look at Venus to understand if Ketu has any dignity. Ketu doesn't here. Ketu's, pretty drained, unless there's a Mercury period associated, which would help it. Okay. Then we'd want to look at Jupiter. How's Jupiter doing in this chart? Well, Jupiter is equally not doing that well because it's Mrita. It's dead, okay? Because it's at the tail end of Aries, if we're looking at the degree here. So that makes an ineffective Jupiter. Here, Jupiter would be associated with the 6th and the 8th cusp, but again, the 3rd and the 12th, because you can look at both of those simultaneously. You can look at associates, one's past, 3rd and 12th, and you can also look at 6th in terms of enemies, stress the individual might be going through in relation to career, transformations that they're going through in relation to career. And here we could see an individual who was, likely getting very prideful, wasn't using his intelligence as per Jupiter to help him with career, which put him through a lot of difficult associations with his associates, band members, people that he had business relations with, and it created a lot of change and hardship for him as an individual.
Okay, I have a question. At one point, we felt that this Jupiter is a bit troublesome. At one point, we kind of deduced that this Jupiter is a bit troublesome and probably weak.
Right. Yes.
Now, if you see the Shadbala graph for Jupiter, I see on screen Jupiter having 537.
Correct. So let's kind of understand that, right?
How do we?
Jupiter has 537 points, but in the Dashamsha, Jupiter is Mrita because he's at almost 26 degrees of Aries. So when a planet is in Mrita Avasta, none of those points become effective,
Okay.
which is almost more frustrating because an individual knows they have this inner capacity in one area of their life, but with career, it just doesn't work in relation to associates. It creates a lot of conflict with associates, a lot of hardship, and a lot of challenges.
So in the
They
Rashi chart,
They can't
how is it
Jupiter
work?
in their career. Sorry?
In the Rashi chart,
Mhm.
in the natal chart, how
Mhm.
has this Jupiter in Magha Nakshatra with a Shadabala of 537, how has it worked in the Rashi chart? In the
How
Dashamsha,
does it
yes.
work in the Rashi chart? Let's take a look. Well, that Jupiter is in the... So Jupiter in this particular instance must be in a condition that's called swapna, because if we remember, it was like 537, wasn't it? So Jupiter in this particular instance, because it's in the second 6 degrees of an odd sign, that would make it Kumara, or adolescent. That's going to give it 1/2 of that 537, which is roughly 269. Now, if a planet is equally swapna, which means asleep, then it's going to create a condition for that planet where those points are then again halved, which is why we have 1/4 of that 537.
Okay.
So roughly 138. And just to kind of give you a look ahead, because I don't know if we'll have time for this today, if you take that 138 points that Jupiter has, you'll see that a certain level of those points, let's bring up the annotation tool so I can point this out to you. A certain level of that 138 points can be used as per aspect to another planet. So Jupiter gives 125 of those 138 points to the sun and boosts the sun's strength. And that would show during a Sun-Jupiter period.
Okay.
And so during that time, there would likely be some wise choices in relation to career and who he was associated with in terms of his path, which is what we're looking at through the Rashi.
Winding this up,
Yeah.
what I want is with Jim Morrison,
Mhm.
how did the nakshatras, say his Ketu is in Shravana. So if you could tell us 2 points about Shravana, then moon in Bharni 2 points. The key points that you found working almost consistently, but at the same time rare that people are not read. So 9 nakshatras, if you can, or the Lagna nakshatra if you want to, and you're free to take the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto.
Well, in terms of looking at Jim Morrison's chart, the thing that fascinated me the most, how much time do we have? I'm wondering if I have time to go into something that's, is it nearly 8 on your end? Huh?
No, go ahead. We can. Yeah, it is 8 on my end.
Oh, well, the reason being is I have to go do something with my son here in a moment. That's why, because I'm kind of scheduled to be there in like another minute or two. But in wrapping it up, one of the things, I won't go fully into that date because I just don't have the time on my end. My apologies. But interestingly enough, there was a point in his career where he did not like being in the spotlight. He was becoming this like sex symbol, always having the spotlight on him, right? And there was a point in his career where he decided he was going to use that. And Shravana on one level is about making connections, seeing how you can bring everything together and make something out of it. So he chose this one particular night in his career where he thought, and it was during his Moon-Venus period, right? So you've got the Moon ruling Shravana, right? And you've got Venus in Swati. He decided he was just going to push those boundaries a little bit further to see if he could do something for the crowd that would break them, from his perspective, out of being kind of stuck in the mud and not doing anything. So he was up on stage, and we'll leave the language out of it for this particular instance, but he got up on the microphone and he just started going, "You're all just a bunch of slaves. You're just a bunch of slaves letting people push you around. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?" And the audience started getting really enraged, right? Then he said something and started bringing the concept of love into the equation. And eventually, and Rahu was running at that particular time too. I think it was Moon, Venus, Saturn, Rahu. Eventually, he jumped off the stage, started dancing through the crowd in a serpent motion as per Ashlesha, right? This is how concrete the nakshatras are, completely, right? And eventually, at the end of the night, it backfired on him because of difficult career associations, and he ended up getting arrested. I think he exposed himself on stage or something like that, because he was wanting to continually push the boundaries.
So
In his head, he was doing something good. He was just wanting people to break out of it. But from the eyes of everybody else, no.
I think we had a fantastic and a very different discussion on Jim Morrison's chart. And, I know you're rushing out. And if I can...
I wish we had more time. I'm so sorry.
No, but, I'm not going to let you go. I'm just going to have a buzzer round with you. I'm
Okay.
take the name of the nakshatras wildly and just one word that comes to your mind, so that people start researching on what you're saying, and testing it out. Okay, so let's start.
You mean each of the nakshatras?
Yeah, each of the nakshatras, but I'm going to be a bit haphazard, so people are going to shout also that all 27 was not covered, but we will cover it later on. But for now,
sure,
Jim Morrison, that's our background, okay, and your research in the background. Barney, what comes to your mind?
Barney, in terms of his particular chart, is that what you're asking?
Any chart, any.
Yeah, with Barney, interestingly enough, I've seen a lot of different things with Barney, and actually, I just saw one earlier today. Let's just kind of rehash a bit of a brief story, which is when the Doors were signed to Elektra Records. And I've seen this with people with placements in Barney, and I was wondering what it is. When they were signed to Elektra Records, the first thing that Jim Morrison did was go back to his room, get a book on mythology, and look up the goddess Elektra to see what that was about. Okay? And I was going, what is it about that? It's something about connections, wanting to see connections between things. And I've seen that with Barney before, right? Looking back on the past and finding a connection to the present. And if you look at what Yama does, Yama takes the souls to the other world before their next birth, and it's reviewing on one's life prior to that. So there's all these different things that the nakshatras can teach us, little sub-layers if you look at that. And if you look at the mythology really plays such a key role in understanding the nakshatras.
One word that comes to your mind for Rohini.
Rohini.
One word.
Evolution. If a planet is in Rohini, that's something that individual is trying to evolve with in their life.
Okay.
It's an important area. Let's say, for instance, in this particular case, Mars is ruling the third and the 10th. So they're wanting to grow their connection with their associates, going to be particular with who they surround themselves by, and they're really trying to grow their career or their path of karma in association with that. Yeah.
I think in this chart, Mars is ruling the 4th and the 11th.
Right, and the 4th and the 11th. Yes, right. And so growing their security, growing their emotional connection. I was looking at the house cusps. That's why I was jumping ahead with that. All of those things, the 4th and the 11th and the 3rd and the 10th.
And
security, the 4th can also deal with fortune sometimes too. Yeah. So 4th and the 11th, connection with each other, trying to grow their fortune, their connection with fortune, or with what money or gain means to them.
And
trying to grow their connection with their siblings and their, yeah.
okay, generally speaking, which is the nakshatra that you associate with astrologers?
A few. Shatabisha, I've seen a lot. I've seen Mula connected with it a lot. Uttara Palguni as well. Been working on figuring that one out for myself. I haven't quite found out why, but it does. Uttara Bhadrapada, that's another one. There are so many nakshatras that are associated with astrologers, yeah.
Okay.
Especially if you have, or let's say for instance, Jupiter and Ashlesha.
Okay.
Because there you have the Jupiter-Mercury combination. That person is going to want to analyze a chart to the nth degree and just, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is your favorite nakshatra?
Oh, that's a tough one. It varies from moment to moment. The ones I love talking about the most are Magha.
Okay.
I like talking about Bharani a lot.
Okay.
Shravana.
Okay.
And equally, Uttara Bhadrapada.
Oh.
Uttara Bhadrapada is a very interesting one. It gives a couple of different things. It can make the person a spiritual warrior, but sometimes it can make them too prideful to the extent that they need a bit of a universal wake-up call. And they have their paradigm shattered. Because basically, Uttara Bhadrapada is associated with Ahir Budnya, which is the serpent of the depths. So it kind of comes in and shows us where we're ignorant, so we can let go of our attachments.
Okay. And last question. When it comes to spiritual evolution, which nakshatra you will associate it with?
That is equally a difficult one because there are so many that will do it. Anuradha is one. Anuradha is one. I've seen that a lot. Equally, I've seen some associations with Dhanishta in that particular instance. Because Dhanishta is... I like to explain it as it connects the musician to the music. Okay, so if an individual is allowing God to flow through them rather than having their ego involved, then they could have a very powerful Dhanishta. Mula as well, because of the individual having perhaps gone through a lot of difficulty, in getting to that particular point and experience suffering, so they're able to understand the suffering of others and they've just let go of the ego. So I've seen that with Mula too. But really, I would say any nakshatra, dependent on the strength of its lord and the planets that are in it, has the capacity to bring that.
Correct. Thank you so much, Inge and Rani. I have been dominant as usual, and I'm not allowed to ask questions. Any questions from you guys? I know we are pushing Michael to the last minute, last step. Any?
And I'm really sorry I didn't have more time. It's just I promised my family that half to my end, which is 8-year time, that I'd be done. So if we want to do this again, I'm always open to that.
We're going to do this again. We're going to do this again, and very, very soon we're going to do this again.
And let's do it longer, and I'll go a little more into depth with these points because I felt like I had to try to make them quick to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Enge.
Thank you very much.
Any comments?
Thanks, everyone. It was very enlightening.
All right.
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
A bit technical, but well.
Yeah, I wanted it to be a bit technical, because what's happening, let me quickly just say what's happening with many of the videos on YouTube is it's very fluffy kind of thing, and I did not want to lose this opportunity with Michael because Michael is so deep, because normally when we do nakshatras, we just talk of the traits and all that, but Michael combines, and I know today's job was very difficult, combining the bala, the avastas and everything. It is a difficult job, and maybe we did not do justice on it. We require a longer period, no doubt. It's like asking me to do 3 courses that he's teaching
Right.
in 1 hour. You know? But
Definitely.
Basically, I'm teaching a course on this entire technique on these Avastas, and that course itself is going to be like 12 or 13 hours.
you
You
know,
see,
Yes.
so it's and basically we can understand why these negative numbers, right?
yeah, and you know, to end this short session is, even if we are not successful in teaching everything in this 1 hour, but at least let's hope that it instigates people to dig deeper into,
Exactly.
you know, the thing. Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure and an honor, you know, talking to you. Very comfortable talking.
My pleasure. Yeah.
You're a great teacher.
Thank you. Let's set up doing this again sometime
We
soon.
will.
I'd like to explain further beyond these points. Yeah.
We would.
Excellent.
And definitely it's going to happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye now.
everyone.
Thank you.